in the aftermath of the Yidden's victory over the Yevonim, as the Rambam says, Chazra Malchus Yisrael, Yiddish kingdom returned, almost for about 200 years. That's the Rambam says, more than 200 years, till the Churban. Now we know there's a very well-known story in Masechta Baba Basra. In the beginning, the well-known story of Hurdus. The Gemara relates that Hurdus was an Eved to the house of the Chashmonaim, and there was a certain girl in the family that he coveted. He wanted to marry her. He heard a baskol, he heard a voice coming from heaven that says that any servant that wants to rebel against their masters will be victorious. He realized that it might refer to him. He killed out the whole family, except for this girl. He wanted to marry the girl, and being that he will be the only, he'll by de facto he'll become the king, because he will be married to the only surviving princess. She ascended to the top of the roof, and she announced that anyone that says that they come from the Chashmonai family are avodim, they're halachically servants, because Hurdus was an Eved Kanani. Hurdus was he had the halachic status of an Eved, who was a goy, who has been bought by a Jewish master, and he goes through a bris milah, he goes to mikveh, he becomes a quasi-Jew, an Eved Kanani. The Rambam categorizes an Eved Kanani as someone who's not a Yid and not a goy. He's in no man's land. Like a goylem, many hold a goylem has the same halachic status. Not a Yid and not a goy. That's why there's a whole shaila if a goylem shechts, is it okay? Is the problem of a goy shechting that it wasn't a Yid shechting, or the problem was the goy shechted? And the difference is, what if it's neither? The pashut, it's only if the goy shechts because of machshavas avodah zarah, but if it's a goylem shchit would be okay l'cher. Anyhow. No, okay, so could be you have to have echadoim al gabov, but as far as his his ma'aser shchit and his machshava would be fine. Rabbi Yosef Engel tines that a goylem is halachically like an Eved Kanani, and the Rambam categorizes an Eved Kanani as someone who's nishken yid, nishken goy, nothing. But either way, that's what Hurdus was. And the girl gets up on the roof and she announces anyone that says that they're a Chashmonai, it must mean that they come from Hurdus and therefore they're avodim. Because the whole family was murdered, she says, I'm the last girl and I'm jumping off the roof. And she jumps. Hurdus takes her body and he ferments it in honey. Keeps it in honey for many years. The Gemara brings two opinions why he did that. One opinion is because he wanted to have relations with her while she was dead. There's a crazy Chassidish ma'ase about something like that, but it's not appropriate for a shul. So we'll have to save it for Thursday night shir or something. And the other opinion, says the Gemara, is that he just wanted to have rights to the kingdom and say, look, I've married the princess, I have her in my house. And the Hurdus took the reign. Hurdus ended up killing all the Chachamim as well, because he heard that the Chachamim Adoirish from the Pasuk in Shoftim, Mikerav Achecha, from amongst your brothers, Tasim Alecha Melech, a king has to be a Jew, can't be an Eved. He said, who said that's pshat in the Pasuk? The rabbis. He killed out all the rabbis. Anyhow, the Gemara there has the story of Hurdus. Ultimately, he did some type of tshuva, and he built a beautiful, he rebuilt the second Beis HaMikdash. He did beautiful, extensive renovations, and it was hafladik, the Gemara describes there in Baba Basra. Now, it sounds like the entire family of the Chashmonaim were murdered. That's what it sounds like. And the shaila is why? What in the world did they do that they should deserve such extinction? Now, there happens to be a debate where they all killed. The Ramban we're going to see says they were all murdered. But there are others that taina that no, there were many survivors. Some Rishonim taina there were many survivors, but they were hiding out. They were afraid. They were afraid to identify themselves because Hurdus would kill them. And that's why when the girl said, if anyone says they come from Chashmonai, they're from Hurdus, There's so many of her cousins remained alive, but they would never say they're Chashmonaim. Out of fear, Hurdas would hunt them down and kill them.
As opposed to if there are any Chashmonaim?
Yeah, the Ramban learns they were all murdered. They were all murdered. Others trying to know there were many lying around, but they were behaltner hate. They were, keeping a very low profile out of fear. So when the girl got up and said, whoever says that they're Chashmonaim, it means they come from Hurdas and they're an Eved, according to the Ramban, it's because there were no other Chashmonaim. According to other Rishonim, there were plenty, there were thousands, but they would not announce it. They would not publicize it out of fear that Hurdas would hunt them down. So why would the Chashmonaim have deserved such an ill fate? So we're going to see a major debate in the Rishonim about how to learn a pasuk in Parashas Vayechi. We're going to see there's a Ramban, there's a Rashba, there's a Ran, there's an Abarbanel, and there's a fascinating Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz as well, and hopefully we'll see some interesting things along the way. So we begin, number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all on the right side. They're all shtiklach from a Ramban. It's a well-known Ramban in Parashas Vayechi. So Yankov is giving the Birchas Yankov, and Yankov tells Yehuda amongst the brachas, Lo Yasur Shevet mi Yehuda, the stick, the scepter, shall never depart from Yehuda. So says the Ramban. The Ramban first of all learns the word Shevet means Malchus. Shevet means a king, not stam a ruler, not stam a rav, a Torah leader. Even though the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Hey quotes the pasuk, and the Gemara says what Lo Yasur Shevet mi Yehuda means is not kings. It's a Rosh Goliath Shebebavel. It's when the Yidden were in Bavel, post Bayis Sheni. There were the exile arcs, the heads of the Golus, and they came from Shevet Yehuda. That's what the Gemara says clear, that's what it refers to. It doesn't refer to any kings, it's Bechal not talking about that. And when the pasuk continues, Mechoykik mi bein raglov, that's the next part of the pasuk, the Shevet will never leave Yehuda, and the Mechoykik will never leave the children of Yehuda. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says Mechoykik is those that teach Torah publicly. Nevertheless, the Ramban learns in simple meaning, Shevet means a king. The problem is, what did Yaakov mean? The kingship will never leave Yehuda? What, from that moment on, there were kings from Yehuda? It's not true. First of all, it took hundreds of years. Even when the Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael, there were hundreds of years until there was a king. And Shaul, the first king, Bechlal, wasn't from Yehuda, it was from Binyamin. Go before then, Moshe. There's a big debate in the Rishonim if Moshe was a king. It depends how you teach the pasuk in V'zoi Sabracha Vayihi B'Shurun Melech. There was a king in Yeshurun. The Ramban brings two pshat, and the Ramban quotes from Chazal. Some say it refers to Moshe was a king. Others say it refers to the Eibishter. But the Ramban himself entertains the possibility that Moshe was a king. Moshe is from Shevet Levi. Yeshua was a melech from Shevet Ephraim. So the first couple kings the Yidden had were Bechlal, not from Shevet Yehuda. But in addition, there were hundreds of years there was no king at all. So what does Yaakov mean? There will always be a king from Yehuda. What do the words even mean? So it says in Ramban, Ein in Yonah shelo yosur la'olam. It doesn't mean that it will never depart. Kikosav Aket, it says in Parshas Kisava, it says in the Teichacha, the Eibishter will take you and your king. El Goya shelo yadata atavavisecha. If God's going to take you and your king elsewhere, and you're going to be sent to another nation and thrown into exile, your king is worthless. You have no king. You're under a foreign power. Lo Yosef Shevet mi Yehuda. There's always going to be a king from Yehuda. It's obviously not literal. It says Ramban, Heim Malcolm Begoila. If us and our king are in Golus, Ein Lehem Oid Melech V'Sarim, then we have no king. And more than that, it says that we know in Sefer Shoftim, V'Yomim Rabim Ein Melech B'Yisrael. Hundreds of years during the times of the Shoftim, there was no king. Continues Ramban, V'Anovi lo yavtiach es Yisrael shelo yelchu b'shevi b'shominyan bavu sheyimloich aleim Yehuda. You ever saw any of the Nevi'im saying that Yidden are safe, you'll never go into exile? Why? Because Yaakov said you'll always have a king, which means you can never go to exile, because then you'll lose your king. It never comes up anywhere in Tanakh, such a gedank, such an idea. So obviously the pasuk never meant that. Avol in Yoni, what it means is shelo yosur shevet mi Yehuda lechod me'echov. What it means is the Shevet will not leave from Yehuda to one of the brothers. In other words, if there's going to be a king amongst the Yidden, it will have to be by Yehuda. Ki Malchus Yisrael hamoishal aleya mimenu yeh. When Yidden have a king, the king will be from Yehuda. That's the pshat. Yes, you can have hundreds of years where there's no king. You can have Yidden and Golos, but when there's a king, that's right from Yehuda. Okay, that's pretty simple. And then he says, V'lo yimshol echad me'echad v'lov. He won't have another brother ruling over him. Now that's already a bisalandrish. A bisalandrish. Now we're saying that none of the other shvatim will rule over Yehuda. That's already different. Because then what if Yehuda has his own king, and the rest of the Yidden have their own king? Like what happened during Bayis Rishon. What? That's exactly what we're going to get to. That's exactly what we're going to discuss. So this point of the Ramban is much different. To say no one else will rule over him does give the room to have what happened during the first Beis HaMikdash when the Malchus split. You had the king of Yehuda and Malchus Yisrael. But the line before that, the Ramban clearly says that when there's a king, it has to be from Yehuda, would not allow such a split like happened in Bayis Rishon. So that's an interesting reason why the Ramban throws in the second idea, which is a much smaller idea. Anyhow, v'chein lo yosser mechaykik mi ben raglav. And so too, when the pasuk speaks about mechaykik, the Gemara says it refers to someone who teaches Torah. But the pshat is, the pashtus is, it means a ruler. And shekol mechaykik b'Yisrael shebeyod tabas hamelech, every leader that has the authority of the king, mimenu yi, will come from Yehuda. Ki hu yimshov yitzava b'chol Yisrael. So now the Ramban says very clear. It's not just Yehuda will have a king. Yehuda will have the king over all of Yidden. V'loi chayis malchus, he gets the kingdom. Okay, so the Ramban has said so far that, yeah, there'll be times when there's no king, but when there is a king, darf sein von Yehuda. Fine. Now we go to the next shtickle. I tried to divide it up to get a little bit of clarity. Number 2, the Ramban continues. Va'akasuv hazer ramaz, the pasuk here is hinting, Yankiv himlich shevid Yehuda alechav. Yankiv somehow had the balabatishkeit to make Yehuda the king over the brothers. V'hoirish Yehuda, and Yehuda got the Yerusha of kingdom. Like we know that Reuven was supposed to get everything. Reuven was meant to be the Bechor and get the double portion. Reuven was going to be the Avodah, was going to be with the firstborns, namely the tribe of Reuven. And that's why Dos and Vaviram get involved in the Machlekes of Kairach. They come from Reuven. They were all upset that Mitamol Shevet Levi, I thought the Avodah was meant to be by Reuven. And Reuven was also going to have the Malchus. And he lost all of it. The Avodah was given to Levi, the Malchus to Yehuda, and the double portion was given to Yosef. Reuven lost all of it. Pachaz Kamayim, because he was because of the story with the bed with Bilah. But continues Ramban that Yankov gave this over to Yehuda. V'hu ma'asha Amar David. It's a pasuk that David says, Hashem chose bi mikol beis avi lis milcha Yisrael la'olam. I'm a king forever. Because Yehuda Bachar Lanagid, and David says very clearly, amongst all the Shvatim, the Eibusha chose Yehuda. And in Beis Yehuda, who did God choose? My father's family. And amongst my father's family, he chose me. We know the story that when all of Yishai's kids were lined up, and Shmuel was sent by the Eibishter, while Shaul was alive, to anoint one of Yishai's kids, and Punkt David was the one kid that wasn't there. The family thought he was a mamzer, the whole story. But ultimately, David's saying over here, from all the Shvatim, God chose Yehuda. From Yehuda, he chose my family. And from my family, he chose me. And it's La'elam. Fine. Continues Ramban. Why did Yaakov say Lo Yosser? Lo Yosser is in a negative. Why didn't Yaakov just say Pashut? Kings will come from Yehuda. What's Lo Yosser? So the Ramban says you have to know like this. Lirmois, there will be other kings over the Yidden before it's given to Yehuda. Once Yehuda gets it, Lo Yosser. Lo Yosser means once he has it, it won't leave. Until David becomes a king, you can have Shaul, you can have other kings, you can have Moshe, you can have Yeshua, all from different Shvatim. Once Yehuda begins, Lo Yosser Memeno Shevet Acher. And that's why it says that the Eibishter gave kingdom to David. Once it was given to David, it's his forever. Before then, though, it could be to anybody. So that's another important point of the Ramban.
Shaul is not really a question.
Right, and neither is Moshe, who was from Shevet Levi. Moshe could be a king, no problem. Yeshua was a king from Shevet Ephraim. The Abarbanel has a long piece in Sefer Shmuel, I think it's Perek Tes, where when Shaul is becoming the king, and he quotes this Ramban, he really tears it apart. He has many, many kashas. But one of them is he doesn't buy this answer of the Ramban, that the Ramban is saying that until David, anyone could have it. Once David was given it, it's his forever. In other words, once it came to Yehuda's forever. Frekta Barbanel, what happened to Asniel ben Kenaz? Asniel ben Kenaz is from Shevet Yehuda. And he was one of the first Shoftim. He was one of the first Shoftim right after Yeshua. He was a Shofet. That Barbanel says it seems like he was a leader. He was a Jewish leader. And he was from Shevet Yehuda. So says that Barbanel, even you'll tell me Moshe, fine. Moshe was before, when Moshe was a king, Yehuda never had it. When Yeshua was a king, Yehuda never had it. But right after Yehuda got, Asniel ben Kenaz had it. So if Asniel ben Kenaz had it, how could Shaul have it later?
He was considered a melech?
He considers him a melech. So obviously we'll answer he was just a shayfet. He was just a shayfet. The shaila is, you're right, a shayfet does have different halachic status than a melech, but it was the greatest level of rulership that existed at that time. They weren't giving out the malchus position. The greatest position was shayfet.
King doesn't really matter.
Hiring for melech at that time.
Then when you say Moshe is not the king, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
It was the highest position also.
Right. No, but the Moshe was okay because Yehuda hadn't got it yet, so I wouldn't present an issue. The issue is if Asniel is considered a king and he had it, then the Ramban's own logic would dictate that Shaul wouldn't be able to receive it later.
All the shoftim after him also.
Those that came, right. So anyway, that's one of the kashas Barbanel has. So L'chera, obviously you'll have to say that Ramban is talking only by a melech, and for some reason, Shevet only here means a melech, which Barbanel also is a big problem. The Barbanel time, if the pasuk here meant a melech, it would have said melech. Shevet, fakert, Shevet means any level of authority. As the Gemara said in Sanhedrin, it's the Rosh Goliath Shebabavel. It doesn't even refer to melech.
So how does he touch Leos or Shevet Milim?
Let's say Rosh Goliath Shebabavel.
And then how does he answer that with?
All right. Well, let's see over here. So the Ramban continues. Look at the next one, number 3. The Inyan Shaul. What was the word of Shaul? So the Ramban's good with Shaul because since according to the Ramban it hadn't been given yet to David, you can't say Lo Yosser shouldn't depart. That only gets set in motion once Yehuda receives it. But the Ramban's bothered with something else. So why did the Eibishter give it to Shaul? Why didn't the Eibishter give it to someone from Yehuda at that time? David was alive. Shaul was only king for 2.5 years. David was alive. He was in his 20s. He could have been a king then. He could have been a king. He could have started his kingship a couple years early. So says the Ramban, V'inyan Shaul hoye, says the Ramban. It sounds like the Ramban's bothered. Why taka did God give it to Shaul, who's from Binyamin? Okay, so you have Midrashim who says that Binyamin in a way deserved the kingship because he was the only one that didn't bow down to Esav. Everyone else bowed down to Esav. By this incredible vort of Reb Heschel of Krakow. Reb Heschel of Krakow, one of the great scholars 400 years ago, that Shaul ultimately loses to Melucha simply for the story of Amalek. He kept the animals alive, kept Agag alive. And the Malchut gets removed from him and given to Yehuda. But Shaul had a good time. Shaul said, I had good kavanas. I left the animals alive to bring karbanas, agar rachmanas. He had good explanations. But Maisa B'Poyel, he did something wrong. He went against the word of God, even though he had good intentions. But what was Shaul's taina? I should remain king because go after good intentions. So Hashem said, wait a second. You know why you were Bechlal king, Hashem tells Shaul? Because your Zayd Binyamin, not Dishkabukht, he didn't bow down to Esav, right? And all the other brothers did. But the other brothers all had in mind that bowing down to the Eibishter, they had good kavanas. It was only in their Maisa it looked bad. So I always went boss of the Maisa, the Eibishter, after the actions. And since the actions of the other brothers looked bad, you Shaul were chosen because Binyamin didn't bow. But now that you yourself did a faulty action, but your tiny I had good kavanas. Good kavanas! Yehuda also had a good kavanah when he bowed down to Esav. That's how the Heschel of Krakow learns why at that moment of the story of Amalek, that would be a reason that Shaul would lose the Melucha and it would revert right back to Yehuda. As I learned to the Heschel. What?
She also went to the pasuk that Binyamin was supposed to have two malachim, no? Shaul and Ishbosheth. That's why Ishbosheth was Abner told him to become king.
Right. Yeah. And he was. He had some... till he himself messed up and he blamed Avner for the concubines and then Ishbosheth was murdered, etc. Fine. Brak upon him. Says Ramban in number 3. He says like this. He says, when the Yidden asked for a king at that time, the Eibishter wasn't happy with their request. We know when the Yidden asked for a king in the times of Shmuel, the Eibishter wasn't happy. Because they asked, we want a king like all the goyim around us. They didn't have proper intentions. And Shmuel said, what's wrong with me? And Hashem tells Shmuel, don't feel so bad. They didn't just despise you, they despised me too. So the Ramban says, they had Shmuel. Shmuel was a shayfet, he was a prophet, he fought their wars. Why were they asking for a king? Like Shmuel says, Hashem Elokeichem Malkechem. What's wrong with God? And Hashem told Shmuel, don't worry, it's not only you they hate me too. They weren't happy with Shmuel to be king, nor with the Eibishter being a king. So therefore the Eibishter Dafka wanted to give the Yidden a faulty kingdom, a kingdom that was temporary. So says Ramban, he couldn't make David king at the time, although David was alive. Because since the Malchus of David of Yehuda would be perpetual, the Eibishter didn't want to give them a perpetual Malchus in response to their undeserving claim, an inappropriate claim. Fascinating Ramban. And therefore he did not want to give to them Malchus Shel Kayama, something which would endure.
No, never had a chance.
Yeah, basically.
Oh, but now we have a couple issues. And here are the big issues. Shaul was told, look, he quotes a pasuk, Shaul was told, Shmuel tells Shaul, you were foolish. You didn't do what God said. Had you done so, the Eibush would make you a king ad olam forever. Shaul was told, had he followed the word of God, he would have been kings forever. Now that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Let's think, why is that a problem for the Ramban?
This whole thing.
Why? But the Ramban says Yankov's promise was only once Yehuda gets it, it won't leave. But maybe you'll never get to Yehuda, maybe you'll be Shaul's forever. So obviously that doesn't make sense. Ramban, because that means Yaakov's promise and Yaakov's prophecy is not relevant. If Yankov, it's like a Chelm prophecy. If Yankov only meant that once Yehuda gets it, he'll never lose it. But he's never going to get it, that's like a Chelm, that doesn't make sense. So then it has to come to Yehuda's day one day, Yehuda's hand. So how could Shaul have been told that if you would be good, you would have kept it forever? So it's a very powerful kasha. So the Ralbag asked the kasha too. The Ralbag asked the kasha, and the Ralbag says, Olam just means Yovel. Olam doesn't mean forever, it just means till Yovel. You find that a few times when Chana brought little baby Shmuel. Shmuel was 2 years old, and she brought Shmuel to Shiloh, to Eli, for 50 years. Shmuel passed away at 52. And she said, I'm giving to him forever, ad olam. Olam is 50 years.
Also by Nevid. Avodah le'olam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's similar. Avodah le'olam. That's how the Ralbag learns. That's all it meant. But the Ramban learns differently. And this is quite important. The Ramban says, She'im, we're in number 3, and She'im loy chata, if Shaul wouldn't have sinned, he would have had Malchus b'Yisrael, but loyal kulam, not on all of them. In other words, Ramban is saying there is room, even in Yankov's prophecy, that there could be 2 kings. But Yehuda would have to be on the majority. Now the Ramban said, we saw in number 1, the Ramban said clearly that the kings have to be from Yehuda. Yehuda has to rule B'chol Yisrael. But here the Ramban seems to be changing it and saying, no, as long as Yehuda would be a king over most of the Yidden, that's enough. That satisfies Yankov's prophecy. And there could be a king on the Shar. V'zeh tam el Yisrael. Fascinating. Shaul was told if you would have been good, you would have been a king, not on the Yidden, but to the Yidden. What does to the Yidden mean? He would have ruled al Shivtei Imma in the Shvatim of his mother. which means he comes from Binyamin, so from Rachel's family, Binyamin, Ephraim, and Menashe, and that wouldn't be a problem, because Yehuda and Ephraim are b'chlal like two different nations. So that's a fascinating thing. The reason this is so important is there's a big shaila b'chlal. When you're only a king over a minority of Yidden, are you considered a full-fledged king? There's a well-known story, the Gemara Masechta Brachas, Daf Yud speaks about a story that Chizkiah, the king, became very ill because he never had kids. He didn't want to have kids because he saw that his kids are he's going to have a Menashe. He didn't want to have kids. So Yeshaya needed to come give a prophecy to Chizkiah. But the problem was, Chizkiah wasn't going to go visit Yeshaya. Yeshaya wasn't going to come visit Chizkiah. So the Eibush had to make a pshara. He made Chizkiah sick, and Yeshaya visited the sick, and then Yeshaya pelts Chizkiah and says, "You're going to die, yada yada." And Chizkiah says, "No, it's never too late. Maybe if I marry your daughter, maybe we'll have good kids, etc." And he did, and they still had Menashe and Rav Shokeh, etc. So it's a fascinating thing that neither Chizkiah wanted to go to Yeshaya nor Yeshaya to Chizkiah. And the Gemara says they both brought rayas why the other guy has to come to him. And Chizkiah said the Navi always has to come to the king. Look by Achav and Eliyahu. Eliyahu, the prophet, is the one that went to Achav. So Bechlal, the prophet, has to go to the king. And Yeshaya said, what are you talking about? There's a story when Achav's son Yehoram was fighting together with the king of Yehuda, Yehoshaphat. The two of them needed to locate Elisha, and they went to Elisha. So you see, the king has to go to the Navi. Now, it's a fascinating thing because if you look through Tanakh, almost always it's the Navi that goes to the king. When David sinned with Bathsheba, Nasan HaNavi was told by Hashem, go to David. God HaChoyzer came, when David ended up counting the Yidden, and there was a Magefa. God HaChoyzer was told by the Eibush to go to David. When Shaul sinned, Shmuel was told, go to Shaul. And before the war of Amalek, when Shmuel had to go tell her, Shmuel was given the Nevuah to go. It was always the Navi always goes to the king. In fact, the Gemara says in Harius, the Gemara at the end of Harius is a whole list when you have to save. If there's numerous people need to be saved, there is an order of priority of who gets first preference. Kohen, and there's a Melech who comes first, and Kohen Gadol, and Kohen Gadol comes before the Navi.
What do you mean when people need to be saved?
Pidyon Shvuyim, or Pidyon Shvuyim, or...
You have time to start thinking...
Well, that's the...
Raise your hand if you're a Kohen.
That's it. But that's where we say that a Mamzer Talmud Chacham, Kohen and Kohen Gadol Amaretz is from that idea. If you have a guy who's a Mamzer but is a Lamdan, he gets saved first before the Kohen Gadol Amaretz. Yikara hi mipninim. But Akaponim, the Melech comes before the Kohen Gadol comes before the Navi. So, L'chaira, Melech definitely has precedence and preference to a Navi. And we find all the stories in Tanakh, it's always the Navi going to the Melech. We find it by Shaul numerous times, we find it by David. So L'chaira, Chizkiah is right. Yeshaya has to come to him. Yeshaya found one story, one Maisa, when Yehoram, Achav's son, Yeshua were in war at Chveis, and they needed to find Elisha, so the two of them found Elisha. Ein mol. Usually it's the Navi that goes to the king, and it makes sense as to the way it should be. Pinchas and Yiftach, another Maisa. It's a well-known story in Medrash Rabbah, Tanchuma. Yiftach had made a pledge that he's going to war, and when he comes, if he wins the war against Ammon, whatever comes out of his house when he returns, his offering is a korban. His daughter comes out, right? And it's interesting. Most Mefarshim learn it doesn't mean he offered her as a korban. He sent her to live as a hermit in the forest, etc. Grad Chazal seemed to learn that no, he actually shechted her and offered her. And the problem is Pinchas could have undid Yiftach's neder. And the Medrash says, Pinchas says, yeah, I can, but let Yiftach come to me. And Yiftach said, "Was? Ich bin doch, I'm the shofet, I'm the king, I'm the nasi. Let Pinchas come to me." Is mamash the same argument? And the Medrash says, and because the two of them were fighting about this, Nebuch, the little girl died. And therefore they were both punished. Yiftach was punished. It says he was buried in numerous cities. What that means is that where he would travel, different body parts would fall off. They buried one hand over here, one hand somewhere else. Wow. And Pinchas was punished. He lost his Ruach HaKodesh for many years. In fact, I have a whole theory.
That's when he stopped becoming Kohen Gadol, no?
Well, that's not my theory. That's already from the Zohar and Pirkei de Belezer. But everybody asks, if Pinchas and Eliyahu is the same person, so why did he have a name change? And why we barely hear from him? After in Sefer Shoftim, we have him in the story of Pelegish Begiva. That's clear in the Psukim. But we don't know exactly when that story happened. The story of Yiftach, it says, was 300 years. We know exactly when it happened. But the Psukim there don't say Pinchas was there. Chazal say Pinchas was there. But then you don't find anything about Pinchas until then Eliyahu Hanavi appears mitamol in the times of Achav, a long time later, hundreds of years later. And the vart is that Pinchas lost his Ruach HaKodesh because of the story with Yiftach, and he only got it back a long time later, and he had a name change. He had to have a Shinui Hashem. His name was changed to Eliyahu, if you hold it's the same person. Obviously, there are many sources in Chazal that it's not the same person. But according to the Shittas that it is the same person, why did he have a name change? Because Pinchas lost, because of the story of Yiftach. It says clearly in Medrash, he lost his Ruach HaKodesh, and apparently he had to have a name change. That's my theory. My theory is the reason he needed to have a name change was in order to be able to get back to Ruach HaKodesh. Anyhow, take it or leave it, but the Medrash clearly says he was punished because of his stubbornness not to go to Yiftach. The two of them were punished. Yiftach died a horrible death, and Pinchas lost his Ruach HaKodesh. So you have a similar story. So over there they were both rather punished. Interesting. But upon him, usually it's the Navi going to the king. And here you have Chizkiah and Yeshaya fighting over this business. L'cher Chizkiah is in the right. Yeshaya found one meiser when during a war, Yeshafat and Yehoram had to find Elisha. Everywhere else it's the Navi going to the king. So the B'yonis and Eibeshitz, not the one I have on the sheet number 7, in a different drasha in his Yaras Dvash, he says a very important yesod. He said the debate between Chizkiah and Yeshaya was, if you're only a king over a few Shvatim, are you really a king? Yeah, by Shaul HaMelech, he was a real king. He ruled over Klal Yisrael. So Shmuel had to go to him. By David was a real king. He ruled over Klal Yisrael. So Nasan HaNavi was sent to him. There is a real Melech. Melech is Kaidim LaNavi. And therefore the Navi always has to go to the king. Chizkiah, at the times of Chizkiah, he's only a king over Yehuda, Binyamin, Levi, and maybe some individuals from the other Shvatim. But Chizkiah lived during the time of the Golus of the 10 tribes, but he didn't rule over them. And therefore his kingdom was very shaky. And that's why Yeshaya Tainad,
so Yeshaya wouldn't hold this.
A king like you has to come to me.
That's right, brought the proof.
And that's why Chizkiah Taka couldn't prove from Shlomo or from David. Chizkiah knew that he has a bit of a weak taina. Why should Yeshaya come to him? So Chizkiah had to bring a raya from Eliyahu and Achav. Why was that a good raya? Well, Chizkiah thought it was a good raya because Chizkiah thought, listen, Achav Bechlal was only from the Malchus Yisrael, so he wasn't really a fully legitimate king. In addition, while Achav was a king, there was a king in Malchus Yehuda. So Achav's kingdom wasn't a full, even though Achav ruled over the majority of Yidden, his kingdom definitely wasn't a full-fledged kingdom. And yet, Eliyahu, Dafka, sword fit to approach him. So me, says Chizkiah, I should say the same thing, Yeshaya should come to me. And Yeshaya told him, you're still different than Achav, because first, Achav, as good as you think your raya is, it's still different, because Achav's kingdom is still better than yours, in one way. Your Tarka Malchus based David, Achav wasn't. But Achav ruled over the majority of Yidden. You're only a miut. And it actually has to do with numerous of the debates between Yeshaya and Chizkiah over there. Because Yeshaya told Chizkiah, you're going to die. There's a gzeira for you to die because he didn't have kids. Chizkiah said, what do you mean? I have a tradition, mibeis Abba, that even if there's a sword on your neck, you should never hold yourself back from davening. Now, what does he mean he has a tradition, mibeis Abba? That means from Malchus Beis David. Because the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah discusses that once the Eibusha makes a decree with a Shavua, you can't break it. Maybe a tzibur could, maybe a congregation could break a gzar did with a Shavua. The shaila is a melech halachically like a tzibur. There's a well-known shuv of the Rashba. The Rashba says every king is halachically like a community. So what Chizkiah was saying was, I have a tradition going with Beis Abba, that since we're real kings, and therefore we have the din of a tzibur, so therefore by us, even if the sword is on our, even if it's exar din with the shvu, I could break it. But Yeshaya said, no, you're going to die. You're not really a king. Therefore you're not halachic like a tzibur, and therefore you can't break exar din with the shvu. It was the same debate of who should go to who, as if you're going to die or not. Anyhow, so Al-Kapanim, coming back to our discussion over here, it's just fascinating that the Ramban over here is saying that, yeah, there's room for Shaul to be a king, but it would only be of a minority of Yidden. But then he says another option, or he would be a melech tachas yad melech Yehuda. Another pshat is Caesar or Palgi Caesar, a Caesar and half the Caesar, which is an idea in Gemara Sanhedrin. The Gemara Sanhedrin says in the future there's going to be two Davids. There's going to be the Groise Mashiach and David Avdi Akim Lahem. There's going to be a new David, but David HaMelech will also be there, and the Gemara says David HaMelech will be like a Palgi Caesar. He'll be like half in charge, a vice president. Which means even, the Gemara is talking about even in Malchus Beis David, at the same time you can have two people, the king and the Palgi Caesar. So says Ramban, maybe that was the promise that Shaul was being told, that you would have been a king forever, together and underneath Yehuda. So Ramban's giving two options how it wouldn't go against Lo Yosher Shevet Mi Yehuda. So here there's two other things. So we're going to go quick. So here's the issue though. Before we get to the Chashmonaim, you come to Yeravam. So we know that Shaul, after Shaul was David, then Shlomo. Was only 2 generations that Malchus Beis David had the rule over all of the Yidden. And then it broke away. In fact, Shlomo was told about this while he was alive. He was punished because he didn't rebuke protest his wife's avodah zarah, and therefore he was told, your Malchus will be torn away from your kid. And it happened right away in the times of Shlomo's kid Rechavam. And the story goes that Yeravam, it's a story in Nach, Yeravam was in the field. This was while Shlomo was alive. Yeravam was originally one of the greatest scholars that ever lived. I mean, he was a big, big man. And he found Achia Shlomo, finds him in the field. Achia Shlomo tears a coat into the 12 different parts. And he tells Yeravam that, you're destined to be king. And he tells him that, he told him, if you're good, you will have it for a long time. But he told him, ach loy kol hayomim, not forever. So look at the next paragraph. Ulefi daiti, says the Ramban, all the kings that ruled from Shar Shvatim after David went against the desire of Yaakov. During Bayis Rishon, the Ramban is saying, all of the kings of Malchi Yisrael for 200 years, they all broke the wish of Yaakov. Why? Because you had people not from Yehuda that ruled over the majority of Yidden. That's a no-no. If the what? So actually, right. So we're going to see that Ramban Dafka hold is not an Nevi'us. It can't be. In order to answer the kasha of the Ran, we're going to see. No, it was a wish. It was a wish of Yaakov. It was a tzavah. It was a last will and testament. It was a tzavah. It was not a prophecy. Because if it was a prophecy, the Ran and the Abarbanel, the Ran and the Abarbanel both ask if it was a prophecy, it barely came true. The prophecy existed for 40, while David was 40 years and Shlomo was 40 years, and that's it. Because otherwise the prophecy didn't exist. Because right after, you had the Malchi Yisrael, where you had kings from other Shvatim ruling over most of the Yidden. Unless you say after the Golus of the 10 tribes. Okay, they had Shem, then they had Shomron, and they had their own things, but the word is they had Roiv Yidden. Says the Ramban, they were going against the will of Yaakov. Now, what did they rely on? He says all of the kings of Malchus relied on Achia Shiloni's words. Achia Shiloni anointed Yeravam, and he said, I'm going to afflict the house of David, achloi kol hayomim, but not forever. So here's the real tricky thing for the Ramban is, what was Achia telling Yeravam? Achia told Yeravam that if you guys are good, you will have kingdom in your family, but not forever. All the Rishonim on that pasuk learn not forever means when Mashiach comes, it's only going to be Yehuda. But until then, for a very long time, it could be, Yeravam could be king. And Yeravam was, Achia broke the coat into 12 parts. He said, you're going to rule over the majority of Yidden. What was Yeravam, according to Ramban, what was Yeravam telling Achia? How could Yeravam say that for a very long time, till Mashiach comes, your family could be the king of majority of Yidden? That's against it. It's a huge issue. It's a major issue. And the Ramban, he's dealing with it and not dealing with it at the same time. The Ramban is just saying that the kings of Bayis Rishon relied on Yeravam's prophecy, but they sinned because they went against Yankov's wish, because Kasher Herichu Yisrael, they didn't have the right to go for a long time, because Achia said not forever.
Where's the line? There was no.
The Ralbag, the Radak, they all learn Ach Lo Kol Hayom means, but when Mashiach comes, it has to stop. But until then, for 1,000 years, you can have it. Also, Mashiach. That's what everybody learns. So, and the Ramban seems Ach Lo Kol Hayom means, I don't know, not more than 50 years or something. He says Kasher Herichu Yisrael. The whole Malchus Yisrael wasn't that long, 200 years. He says the problem was they went too long. Once they went too far, they no longer could support themselves on Yeravam's on Achia's prophecy. The Melech Achar Melech, and they didn't go back to Malchus Yehuda. They went al Tzava. They rebelled against the Tzava of Yaakov. They were punished. So that's an interesting thing. He has to teach that when Achia told Yeravam was only for a small amount of time. When Achia said not forever, he meant not more than 50 years or something. Which is not how anybody learns that pasuk. If you learn the pasuk like everybody else, it's a big problem with the whole Ramban's Mahalach. How could Yeravam be told by Achia that guys could be a king for a very long time? Now he comes to the Chashmonaim. So says the Ramban, this was the punishment of the Chashmonaim who ruled in Bayis Sheni. And the Ramban says fast, we're number 4. Says the Ramban, they were Chasidei Elyon, they were the greatest of the great. If not for them, the term would have been forgotten. But they were punished to Oynish Gadol. He says, because the 4 sons of the old Chashmonai HaChasidim that ruled one after the other, with all of their strength and all their atzlacha, they fell to their enemies by the sword. And then he quotes the Gemara in Bava Basra that that girl got up and said, whoever says they're from the Chashmonaim is an Eved. Shenichrusu kulam ba'oven aseh, they were all wiped out because of this sin. He says, some of them were tzedukim. He says, but that's not why they were killed, because that was only some of them. But that was only the Zerah of Shimon with tzedukim. But the rest of Matasyahu's kids, the only infraction they had was the fact that they were kings, although they weren't from Malchus Beis David, and they removed the Shevet and Mechokek Lagamri. And he says, that's why they were murdered. He says, fascinating. They were supposed to be the servants, Yehuda supposed to be the king, and they rebelled. They took the kingdom from Yehuda. So what was their punishment? Their own servant, Hurdus, rebelled against them. The Eibishter took their own Eved, and the Eved cut them off. Imagine the Midah Keneged Midah. The Chashmonaim should have been servants to Yehuda as the king. And they usurped the Malucha.
There was no Malucha for 150 years.
Okay, but when there is, the Ramban said in the beginning of the first paragraph, when there is a king, it has to be from Yehuda.
Bayis Sheni was no Malucha until they came.
Yeah, right, but correct. But now,
correct,
that's right. But now that Maluch is possible, it belongs to Yehuda. That's what the Ramban, the first thing the Ramban says is whenever there are kings, it has to belong to Yehuda. And that's why they were, so he says they were all murdered, and the only infraction they had was this. Mama's crazy.
Themselves. People just
They think they're tzaddikim also.
The Chashmonaim? They should have appointed someone from Yehuda.
What?
They could have appointed. There were plenty of Choshev people there from Yehuda, from the Shevet Yehuda.
But they didn't appoint themselves.
Sure they did.
Themselves.
Yes.
People just made them.
But they had. But even
That's
so,
about
even so.
103 years.
Right, and the Rambam says about 200 years. I know.
Even if they were the most roy for Malucha, they should have appointed someone.
I know, but the Rambam's lashon is, he says Chazra Malchus Yisrael more than 200 years. I know that's
103. The 5 generations of Chashmonaim was 103 years.
You counting Hurdus' generation? You're counting Hurdus' kingdom.
What?
You're talking about because the story of Aristobulus. You count.
Well, there was 5 generations of Chashmonaim.
Yeah, no. But then what about Hurdus' times and after Hurdus? In other words, kingdom returned to the Yidden.
Who was after?
Are you counting Hurdus in the 5 generations?
It was 5 generations.
I'm asking. Are you counting Hurdus in the 5?
You know
Right.
history.
The Rambam says 200 years, more than 200 years. You're not counting Hurdus in your story. You're talking about when Pompey came and the two brothers were fighting, Aristobulus and Alexander Yanai.
That was 100 years later.
Yeah, but it didn't stop there completely. Hurdus was later.
It was still there into it was in the middle of 300 years into Sheni.
Correct. But there was still some level of Malchus until the Churban. Yeah, the Romans, Pompey came, the whole story. Pompey came and the Romans had a stronger hand. But the Yidden still had some level of Malchus, autonomy, until the end, as the Rambam says. Now let's just, so here's the thing. So the Ramban says a crazy thing, and then he finishes off, it could be, what was even worse was the fact they were Kohanim. A Kohen has no business being a Melech. A Kohen Mamash has no business being a Melech. But it was because they were over on the tzava of Yaakov. So I just want to say that, let's just do this quickly. So, most Rishonim disagree with this Ramban. And most Rishonim hold that the Chashmonaim actually did not go against the will of Yaakov. Neither did all the kings in Bayis Rishon go against the will of Yaakov, and that's why when Achia told Yeravam, if you would be good, you'd be king for a very long time, it was literal. Now, why Taka doesn't go against the will of Yaakov? So look at number 5 on the left, as Docher Rashba. Now the Rashba was peppered by some kashas. Somebody asked the Rashba, and the Ramban also dealt with this in one of his drushes. The Christians want to prove from this pasuk Mashiach came, because it says Yehuda will always have a king, ad ki yava Shiloh, till Shiloh arrives. That means there'll always be a king till Shiloh arrives. Now, there's no more king of Yehuda, right? Must be Shiloh arrived. Must be Yoshka. Mashiach has already arrived and finished. So the Rashba says like this. Let me tell you, Amitus Pirish HaKos of Kacho. What it means is like this. He says the Rashba is very simple with the pasuk. The Yankiv meant B'chal something completely different. Lo Yasur Shevet Mi Yehuda. Lo Yasur Shevet Mi Yehuda means like this. There'll be kings from many Shvatim. And for most Shvatim, once they lose it forever. Yehuda will not lose it forever. Because he'll get it back when Mashiach comes. Look how he types, look in the second line. Kilab Soif Yava Shiloh. Shiloh will come, which is from Yehuda's nation, Yehuda's Shevet, and he will return the Malchus. Vatan, what this means is all the Shvatim, every Shevet had a Melech or a Shevet. Ein Echad Mikulam that didn't have a Sraras Malchus or Shevet. Historically, every Shevet always had somebody of greatness. Right, he said Malamdim and Seifim. Avo Mipnei She'eino Nitla Lahem. But because it wasn't their official inheritance, so when they lost it forever. But Yehuda, when it departs, it never departs forever. What Yankov meant was, when the Shevet leaves Yehuda, it's not forever. Because they'll get it back with Mashiach. That's what a pasuk meant. Avosararis Yehuda v'Yerusha, to him it's Iker Memshala, and Hashem. He says Hashem never promised that the Yidden won't go into Golus because you always need to have a king.
Rashi says, "David lo Yosef Shev Yehuda with David ve'Elach, Elu Roshei Goliath."
That's what the Gemara said in Sanhedrin, yeah. And with David ve'Elach is what the Ramban also said. Until David, anyone could have it, right? That all fits fine.
Continue, isn't it? Melech, Roshei Goliath.
That's what the Gemara said in Sanhedrin. The Gemara said in Sanhedrin. That statement comes from Sanhedrin Daf Hey. Now continues the Rashba. But the promise of Yankov was that Yehuda owns the kingdom. And therefore, if it departs, it won't depart forever. Because there one day will come a time when Mashiach will come and he'll return it to him. And when the pasuk says, Ad kiyava Shiloh, it doesn't mean until. Umilas ad b'makam hazeh k'may lo, it means forever. Because the pasuk means like this. The Shevet will never leave Yehuda, lo'ad forever, comma, because kiyava Shiloh, because one day Shiloh will come and he'll bring it back. Umatzina ad k'may lo'ad, like it's shoichen ad. When it says it means lo'ad, the Eibush rests and dwells forever. So the Rashba learns, b'chlal, what Yaakov meant was like this. Yeah, Yehuda will be king, and then Yehuda won't be king. But he won't lose it forever. So according to the Rashba, Yehuda could be king for one generation, for David and Shlomo, no problem. The point of Yankov's prophecy was he'll lose it, but it'll come back. So the whole Bayis Rishon, he could have lost it, no problem. And your Rav's family could be kings, no problem. And the Chashmonaim did nothing wrong. That's Bechlal not what the prophecy meant. And the Maharal in number 6 says the same thing. The Maharal in his Gurari and Mamish says the same thing as the Rashba. The Maharal says, Im husar lefi shah v'chazar elav. If you lose something for a small amount of time, it's not called removal. Removal means forever. That's what the word means. Anything which comes back to its original place means it never departed. So even though for many generations Yehuda won't have a king, but it's called not departing. Because anything which departs never returns. If it returns, it means it never departed. It's mamish the same answer as the Rashba. So according to that, Bechlal the Chashmonaim did nothing wrong.
Did they give a reason?
And Yeravam could have been promised by Achia to be kings for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's never a problem. Because they could remove it from David. Yeah, if I cared, Yankov was prophesying that it will be removed, but not completely removed. That's Bechlal one Mahalach, according to which the Chashmonaim did nothing wrong. The Ran, in his Droshes Haran, in Drush Shvi, also has a Mahalach about this, and the Ran says a very important thing. The Ran says, you know what Bechlal Yaakov meant? Yankov meant that whenever there's going to be kings amongst Yidden, some of the kingdom will belong to Yehuda. Again, the Ran says the pshat in Yankov's prophecy and bracha was that whenever there's kings amongst Yidden, Yehuda has to be somewhere involved. So during Bayis Rishon, as long as Malchus Beis David had a couple shvatim, is good enough. The Aseres Shvatim Bechlal was not going against what Yaakov said, and Achia could have promised Yeravam a long-term maluch. It's not a problem, because Yehuda always has a remnant. The problem is the Chashmonaim, because the time of the Chashmonaim, Yehuda had nothing. So the Ran says like this: the Chashmonaim themselves did nothing wrong, because Yankov wasn't making a prohibition that no one could be a king besides Yehuda, like the Ramban. The Ramban learns Yankov was giving a tzavah, Allah's own Wittgenstein, only Yehuda could be king. The Ran says no, Yankov was giving a promise. It was a promise and a prophecy and a haftacha that Yehuda will always be somehow arangemished in the Malucha. But other people have the right to be king, so the Chashmonaim have the right to be king. The problem is, though, what happened to Yankov's prophecy? Why during the Chashmonaim wasn't there should have been somebody in the Malucha from Yehuda? So the Ran says a fascinating, the Ran says the Chashmonaim were not kings. The Ran says they Bechlal weren't kings, they were puppet kings under the Romans. The Ran holds the Chashmonaim were not Malachim. The Rambam says they were. You know what it has to do with? With how you say Hallel on Chanukah. Because the Gemara says in Megillah you don't say Chanukah on Purim. You don't say Hallel on Purim. 3 different reasons. One reason is because it's a Nes and Chutz La'aretz. One reason is because the Megillah itself is the Hallel. But Rava says because how could you say Hallel Avdei Hashem? We're under the auspices of Achashverosh. So the shaila is so what about now by Chanukah? How do we say Hallel? How do we say Hallel? So the Rambam says, well, the Malchus returned. The Ran says, B'chal, the Malchus never returned. Because the Ran holds the main reason of why we don't say Hallel on Purim is because why? Is because the Megillah itself is the Hallel. Not because of the reason we're still under the auspices of Achashverosh. Because according to the Ran, by Chanukah, we were still also under the auspices of the Goyim. It's a fascinating thing. They Bechlal weren't kings. Fascinating mahalach of the Ran.
What's the problem with Hanukkah?
If they were kings, then the promise of Yankov is obviously Yankov said that whenever there'll be kings, Yehuda will have something.
No, but your Hallel.
No, because the Gemara said, because according to the Ran, we're still under the we weren't autonomous. We were under the auspices of a different nation, and Rava says in Masechta Megillah, you don't say Hallel on Purim.
But they didn't. Once they conquered. Yehuda conquered, they had the center of Eretz Yisrael all to themselves. They kicked that in that area. The
Ran says they were puppet kings under the Romans. The Romans were in charge. It's a drush of the Ran. Rosh Hashvi, Rabbi.
The Romans came. They wanted to get on. They kept on kicking them out. Every
he says before the Romans it was.
103 years. They kept on kicking
I know the number
them out
103 by
Eretz
Talibah.
Yisrael.
Beforehand.
100 years later, they ruled the whole Eretz Yisrael.
The Ran says they were puppet kings under other nations. He says before the Romans, he rather says the Persians. It probably means the Greeks. But the Ran says they were puppet kings under other. He says clearly, he says they were not malachim, and he has to say that because it was according to his shitta, the promise of Yankov was obsolete. I just want to finish one more thing before I go. The Yonis and Eibeshitz in number 7 has an incredible mahalach. In Yaris Dvash, Heilitz Ba'adam, he wants to defend the Chashmonaim. And he has another shaila. The famous story in Masechta Brachas that they removed Rabban Gamliel from being the Nasi. They put Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the Chachamim in Yavna. It's a story in Masechta Brachas. The problem is Rabban Gamliel comes from Hillel. He's an Einakul of Hillel. Elazar ben Azariah was a Kohen. He comes from Ezra. Frege Björns and Eibeshitz, how did they have the right to remove authority from Yehuda and give it to Elazar ben Azariah? And he quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Hey that we said, Lo yasa shevet mi Yehuda and mechoykik mi bein raglov. Eilu b'nei Hillel. Okay, it's a bit of a misquote, but the point is that the Gemara there says there has to be Torah authority from Yehuda, and in fact the Gemara there says mi b'nei Hillel, which would include Rabban Gamliel. So how in the famous story in Yavne did they depose of Rabban Gamliel and appoint Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? So he quotes a famous Tosfos. The Tosfos brings a Yerushalmi in Kilayim that actually Hillel does not come from David HaMelech. Hillel's family were from Sheva Binyamin. They come from David, from one of David's daughters. It's a famous thing. Nesiei Eretz Yehuda HaNasi was not from Malchus Beis David. Yeah, the Gemara said in Shabbos that Rebbe came from David, so he wanted to explain the whole story of David and Bathsheba and Uriah. He did come from David, but not Ben Achar Ben. He was Ben Achar Ben from Sheva Binyamin. Hillel's family was from Binyamin. It's a Yerushalmi. Ulefiza so what do you see from there? That as long as from your mama, your shaykh is to Shevet Yehuda, it's okay, you could be in charge. Ulefiza the imu rak mitzad emi Yehuda, it's good enough. And that was Bnei Bonav Shel Hillel. So wait a second. The Chashmonaim come from Aaron. Who was Aaron married to? Elisheva, Nachshon ben Amminadab's sister. So it's from the mama, all Kohanim come from Yehuda. So says of Yonis and Eibeshitz, it's just as good as Hillel's family. Ishtar Shel Aaron was the sister of Nachshon, and therefore the Chashmonaim from their mother, they're just like Bnei Hillel. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a Kohen. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is no worse than Rabban Gamliel. They both have the same yichus. And then he throws in another thing. Nadav, it's a famous story. It's okay, he quotes it from a Tanchum, it's also a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Nadav and Avihu were once walking behind Moshe and Aaron. They said, when will these two old people die and we'll take over the rulership? What they meant was that we're the only ones that could be king, because from the mama, their mother, Elisheva, was the sister of Nachshon, Shevet Yehuda. So therefore, Rabbi Yonis and Eibeshitz creates a whole Yesod based on that Tosfos in Yerushalmi, that Bechlal Hillel's family were only from Malchus Beis David, from one of the daughters of David, but that's enough to have rulership. So it explains the story of Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and explains the whole Chashmonaim. So Akaponim, what you see from all this is that most shittas disagree heavily with this Ramban. The Rashba, the Ran, the Barbanel as well, Rabbi Yonis and Eibeshitz, the Maharal there in that paragraph mentions the Chashmonaim. They all believe the Chashmonaim did nothing wrong with the command of Yankov. And Yankov, the Rashba says Yankov meant one thing, the Ran gave a different pshat, but Al Kopanim, they all believe that the Chashmonaim did nothing wrong. But the Ram, so we mentioned, many hold that most of the Chashmonaim weren't killed. Thousands of them survived, but they were scared of Hurdas to come out and say something. The Ramban holds they were all killed. Well, the Ramban's the only one that holds that they had this big infraction. So the Ramban L'Shitose, because he holds they had this big infraction, for some reason or another, they deserve this terrible midah keneged midah. They should all be wiped out. But the other Rishonim who hold they did nothing wrong, maybe they're the ones that hold that actually there were many survivors. They were just scared of Hurdas. All right, this wraps up this discussion. Yes, Rabbi Tannenbaum.
Son was married to